I think by imposter syndrome, I think for me, imposter syndrome is feeling unqualified for the space that you're in, whether that's at work or with your friends, or just feeling like, yeah, you don't have the right to be there, to be in that space.
The general unjustified, well, mostly unjustified sense of inadequacy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's also like the doubt though of your successes not coming across true to you, but then, you know, people will be like, but that's a great thing that you've done, like you've been really successful with that, and you just don't welcome in or receive the praise, I think.
Yeah, it's the irony, isn't it? It's like you only ever think it about yourself, and obviously that's what imposter syndrome is, but you would never wish to have those thoughts about somebody else who is in the same space.
I do think about other people sometimes.
Oh really?
Yeah.
That's something you got to work on then, maybe. But yeah, I think it's one of those that oftentimes a way that people say that you can think to improve it is, would you ever say that to a friend, or would you speak to somebody else in that way? But it's such a catch-22 because it's almost subconscious until you start thinking about it consciously. You can't fix it.
Yeah.
Because you have to think about the self-talk that you're reverberating like within.
Definitely.
And catch yourself out on it, because sometimes you can just go into like, well, I don't know what I'm doing here, I don't know why. It's like being on the sofa. What am I doing here? Why am I on the sofa?
Yeah.
Why am I talking about this? What makes me justified to talk about it?
Completely.
So
Yeah, I think it goes around in like cycles as well, because I go through a period of backing myself with it and being like, well, I had a really successful time doing that and I know I'm capable.
yeah.
But I sometimes can still slip back into that, but I don't understand why that was a success that I've done, or why I've succeeded there, or why I've done that task correctly, why I deserve to, I've been in a certain, meeting or client call or whatever it might be. But you've got to remind yourself that, I did it whenever it was, and it was successful, and I got good feedback, and you've just got to go in with like the power of backing yourself, I think, and then reminding yourself of that for the next time you do have those doubts, which I think is really important. It's definitely something you have to train yourself to do.
Yeah, I think ironically, when, for example, I'm in that situation and something does go wrong, or like I don't, I could have done better, I don't get that imposter. I don't know, I feel worse when I do better, because I think another layer of imposter syndrome is that level of impending doom that someone's going to find you out. And it's like, if someone compliments me, I'm like, oh, if only you knew. And it's like what?
Yeah, I fooled you again.
Yeah, exactly.
Pulled the wool over your eyes
it's
again.
Like, maybe I've just done a good job.
Yeah.
It's actually okay. And then sometimes I might not do a good job, but none of that affects your values or your worthiness to then do other things.
I've got quite an interesting relationship with imposter syndrome, because at times, I'm not sure if this is a hot take or not, but at times I often feel like it's a good way. Obviously it's annoying, and I have exactly that, and if someone says good job, I'm just like, it was not a good job, someone else did it or whatever. But at times I often find it's a good way to keep one's ego in check, because the flip side of imposter syndrome is someone that is so overconfident in their own abilities that they're just completely delusional, and that's even worse because those people can be incredibly toxic. So looking at the polar opposites, for myself, I like to find that I'm somewhere in the middle. Or a healthy place to be is in the middle. Someone with a bit of imposter syndrome who's always kind of like doubting themselves and wanting to make sure they hold themselves to account, not like a politician, but like hold themselves, at least in my job, creatively to account and say, was that good enough? Can you do better? But
also being able to take the praise when you have it, though. I think that's the difference, isn't it? It's always being able to use comparison in the best light possible, so that you're improving yourself and improving your own abilities, and not thinking that everything you produce is incredible. But being able to take on that compliment when somebody says that's actually really quite incredible. You don't go, oh well, it wasn't really me, it was like someone else helped with it, they did most of the work, and then
team
I
effort,
just kind of and things are a team effort, but sometimes things are aligned to something that you've created that is actually really brilliant, and there's nothing wrong with going, thank you.
I think my best way of keeping imposter syndrome in check would be the power of hindsight. So when you finish something, just shut it off immediately and then give it some time and then reflect on it in a bit. So I often find myself looking back at previous work that I've done, and only then can you have the objective way of saying, that was good, that I'm really proud of that. Actually, I didn't even realise I was proud of that at the time, and I feel like the praise I received for it or didn't receive was justified, and then vice versa. And I think it's a good way, and I think it's almost like an art form that one will never become fully accomplish that is actually being able to just like shut off once you're in the middle of doing some work or have completed it and just think, no, only time will tell whether or not this is good and stuff. And
I think it's like leaning into the weakness as well, though, because we're all human.
Yeah.
So if we lean into it and we say, oh God, that wasn't particularly great what happened there, but do you know what? We're all human. And I think taking away that fear of being like judged by something, and then it makes you feel a lot more welcomed in and a lot more relaxed about if something did go wrong. You know, you're not going to spiral into anxiety. It's a human thing. It's going to happen to everyone. And I think similarly with what you were saying before about like the happy medium, I think for me, like ironically, the imposter side of stuff makes me succeed better and work harder, which is ironic. But I think because I've got that tendency to kind of feel a bit like that, in reflection, what I produce is of good quality. But it is just about being able to say like, yeah, that was mega what I did, and just sitting in it and being relaxed with it.
That really reminds me as well, because I think for me, where I've noticed a lot of my imposter syndrome is where I've decided that I've given myself absolute. So I'm like, I am not good at that thing. I've decided, or like for example, I remember you saying to me, Harriet, a couple of weeks ago, you were like, oh, you're a very patient person. And I remember thinking, again, if only she knew. But like, that's because I have in my life probably been more impatient than I should have been. So therefore I was like, I'm an impatient person.
Yeah,
and it's
that's
like,
it.
no, I'm not any type of person. I'm putting myself in a box. And if someone has an opinion, or I don't know, I think it's when someone disagrees with this opinion you have of yourself, you deny it. And it's like, we don't have to work in absolutes all the time. As you said, like, you're human, you'll do things well, you'll do things not so well. That doesn't mean you're one end of one spectrum, doesn't mean you're just the worst person in the world, doesn't mean you're an egotistical, like, egomaniac. You can be a bit of everything. It's fine.
Absolutely.
It's hard to overcome.
When it comes to imposter syndrome and its prevalence within our sector, i.e. marketing and creativity and all that kind of stuff, I suppose ultimately it would go down to the specific role, because I reckon some roles will be more susceptible than others, but not trying to be a psychologist, I think ultimately it just comes down to personality types. And I think the way you'd analyse and measure imposter syndrome would be the same way you'd, as we were saying earlier, the same way that you manage ego. I think a lot of people that tend to have more imposter syndrome tend to have a lot less of an ego particularly about certain things. But maybe, I mean, I don't know, maybe it's because I'm in a creative role and you guys could disagree with me here, but as in like a content production role, as in like people who tend to have like the job where it's just like, I'm making the thing, I'm the artist or whatever. That's where a lot of, where imposter syndrome or lack thereof would be more noticeable and more measurable, perhaps.
I think we did a IPA course, myself and Charlotte. It was like a talk. I don't know if you guys managed to join it, but they talked about the different types of imposter syndrome that you can encounter. So that was a bit of education for myself. I thought imposter syndrome was felt quite similarly by everybody else. There's a really interesting type of imposter syndrome in there called the natural genius. And like you were saying, I think a lot of it is due to not sectors, but how your upbringing or your external factors or your childhood, and a lot of that feeds into it. So the natural genius is all around the fact that when you were younger, you probably pick stuff up quite quickly, and you probably get comments like, wow, isn't she smart for her age? Or gosh, she's the smart one in the group. This is not about me, by the way. I was always labelled as the arty creative type. But I've never really obviously resonated with that. But what that imposter syndrome would look like with that for that person is when they don't get that feedback when they come into adulthood, because they're no longer a child. When they're not told, oh, you're the smart one in the group, or gosh, aren't you naturally gifted? They feel like they're often not doing enough. So they're constantly striving to try and find more knowledge or facts or information that they can give to you to be able to hold on to that kind of like verbal praise.
Yeah, it's like, I think you're going to have your introverts and your extroverts. Yeah. I would say I'm a bit of both. I think I'm a bit in the middle. But say for someone who is experiencing imposter syndrome, who's extroverted, they might be able to overcome that really, a lot more easier than it would be for someone who's introverted. They might be able to compartmentalise it in the brain, whereas someone who's introverted might sit back and be like, I don't know what I'm doing here. I need to go and sit in the toilet and cry for a bit. It's hard, isn't it? So I think it ties into like what you said, like your external factors, how you are, what praise you've been given, like in the past, like as you're growing up, as you said?
I feel self-doubt over pretty much anything that I make at the time. And I'm always kind of like second guessing myself as to if my need for validation from my peers. So for example, Liam, who's behind the camera right now, pretty much anything that I make in work or out of work, I always say, can you look at this?
Yeah.
Because I value his opinion a lot. I'm not trying to just, be nice, but I really value his opinion. So if I'm like, oh, I don't know, even if in the back of my head I know that it's good, I want him to just say, like, give him the seal of approval.
It's like the justification process.
The justification. And I always think, is that like an egotistical need for validation, or is that because I'm doubting whether it's good, which is most of the time, because I'm always just like, oh, I don't even know.
What would happen if Liam turned around and said, I actually think that's a pile of rubbish? Would you back yourself, or would you be like, okay, I agree, I need to redo that?
Well, I guess it's that interesting psychological experiment where if someone's struggling to make their mind up on something, and if someone forces them to make a choice by removing one of the options from them. So in that example, if he was to say, no, that was actually crap, and I was to be like, no, I think it's quite good, then that would be my mind made up. But then if it's him, if I was to agree with him, which I guess would happen some of the time, then I guess that would be my mind made up. But I guess maybe I'm actually just discovering this, live now. Maybe that's just my way of actually trying to make my mind up myself. I
wonder then, like, in the same light, if Liam came back and was like, spot on, perfect, how would you react? Would you be like, yeah, knew it? Or would you be like, I think he's missed something? Like, there must be something to...
First of all, he'd never be that glowingly positive. So I don't know. I don't know, actually. I'd just be like, cheer. I guess it depends what it was.
Yeah.
If it was I think a lot of the time, if it's to do with something more like what he does, then I'd take it more as a compliment, I guess, because it's just like, oh yeah, you know what you're talking about a lot in that sense. But my overall point being, I don't know how imposter syndrome-y that is, or it's all about ego. I think that's I think the underlying point of what I'm trying to get across.
I would, and I don't know, but I don't know whether it would be ego. I just think because we were chatting about this in line with your point earlier about the whole when you're at school and you're told that you're X, Y, and Z. About your every piece of work for the most part you produce is marked. It's whether it's graded or whether it's just like, yeah, well done, or
objective.
like, oh, yeah,
a little comment,
a little comment
face
here and there. Yeah, it's like you get that until at least as like 16, 17, 18, and all of a sudden you're in the world of work and you have to like wait for opportunities to prove yourself instead of someone literally saying, well done, Charlotte, that email was really good. Like, people aren't going to do that. You just have to trust. And I think that's kind of where I think in terms of the need for feedback, I don't know whether it's I would disagree it's an egotistical thing. I think it's just like a check-in of like, am I doing okay, and literally having that subjective feedback, because I think that's kind of where the imposter syndrome starts, because you're like, well, no one said that that piece of work was good or bad, so I'm just going to decide it's bad, or I'm going to decide either way, because you don't get that black and white feedback.
Yeah,
so
the argument might be
works.
Is if you don't ask for feedback, you could actually be breeding imposter syndrome more.
Yeah.
There's actually nothing wrong
you fill in
with
the gaps.
and there's nothing wrong with reaching out to say, do you think this is up to standard? I value your opinion. And them going, yeah, I think it is. I don't think that's you being egotistical. I think that's
not egotistical. A lot of the time it kind of comes in being held to account. I think that's the wrong way of putting it, but in my head that's how it is. And sometimes it can be, I know in the back of my head that this piece of work is awful, but I just need someone else to confirm it so I can nip it in the bud and give up on it, or something like that, which does happen sometimes. Going back to the start, I think the best way is to kind of develop a healthy relationship with them, just like with literally everything in life, moderation, because it's good to hold yourself in check. It's good to kind of second guess yourself, because it makes you be better, it makes you improve. But obviously it can be so incredibly self-destructive to the point where you just don't get anything done and you don't have any confidence in your abilities and you can't move forward.
I think identifying the certain imposter syndrome that you might struggle with as well is really where I started to improve with the experience with it myself as well. and finding out. It's obviously so easy just to search online. Pop in a quick quiz, see which one you identify with the most, and then it'll come up with loads of tools that you can take to make sure that you're taking the right steps to kind of combat against it.
And recognise it when it's happening. So I have the little thing where it's just like, oh, hello, imposter syndrome, my old friend, it's you again. But it just happens. Yeah.